Hello everyone, in today's After Effects scripting tutorial, we're going to be taking a look at creating a file reader. Now this file reader basically will be able to recognize text files, JSON files, and XML files, and we're going to be learning how we can interpret these files to adjust compositions or properties of a composition. So the basic way it works is included in the project file. There's a text file, an XML file, and a JSON, each of which contain data for a composition name, a background color, and whether or not we want to add a lens flare. So we're going to be using these three file types to do the same modifications to our composition. So if I go ahead and run this script really quick, I can select a file and choose from a text, JSON, or XML. I'll just choose an XML here, and I'll go ahead and select my provided XML file and click on OK. And it's going to give us the path in here, and we'll just click on Apply, and it will say Done once it's complete. So if we look inside of our XML file, we want to change the comp name to template1, which it has been. We want to change the background color to 111, which is white. So if we turn these off, you can see the background color is now white. And we also want to add a lens flare. So we have a solid here with optical flares applied. So that's basically how the script works. It's pretty straightforward. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to be writing about 120 lines of code today. So we're going to start off by creating a new JavaScript file, and we'll just call this the file reader. And the first thing we're going to want to do is include an outside library. So we're going to do hashtag include, and we're going to say json2.js. When we include this, we'll need to make sure the json2.js file is in the same folder or directory as our JSX file. And this will basically allow us to parse JSON data like an object. And then after this, we're going to go ahead and set up a couple of global variables. And these are just variables that we're going to reference throughout that we don't want to have to worry about scope with. So the first one we'll just say is equal to file, and it's going to be a new file. And then the other one is just going to be called check, and we'll set that equal to 0. We're going to use the file variable to get our text, JSON, or XML file, and our check file is going to be a number representing whether or not we have actually selected a file. So after that, like usual, we're going to set up our UI. We'll create a main window here, which is equal to a new window. The type is a palette. We'll call this a file reader and undefined size. Then we'll grab the orientation of the main window and set that equal to column. And now we're simply just going to create two groups. If you take a look at the UI, you can see we just have an edit text box and a button, and then a button in the other group. So we'll create our first group called group 1, and we're going to add this to the main window as a group, undefined size, and we'll call it group 1. And then the orientation for group 1 is going to be left to right, so row. And now we can go ahead and add our elements. The first one we're just going to call file loc box for file location box, and this is going to be our edit text box that contains our file location. So this is going to be equal to our first group, and we're going to add an edit text, undefined size, and then the text inside of this we're just going to say selected file location, and that's just going to sit in the edit text box until we actually select a file. Then I'm going to actually distinctly set the size of this box, so I'll grab our file location box and set the size equal to something pretty wide, maybe 160 pixels and by 20. Now that we have that, we'll go ahead and create another variable for our get file button, and this is going to be equal to our group 2, and we're going to add a button, and we're just going to call this file with a couple of dots. And I'm also going to add a help tip for the get file button, just so the user has a better idea of what's going on. So I'll grab my get file button and help tip, and we're going to pass a string through here. And we're just going to say something like selected text, JSON, or XML file to change the comp. Alrighty, now we'll make our second group, which contains our basically apply or generate button. And this is going to also be equal to our main window, add a group, and we'll call it group 2. Then again, just like the previous group, we're going to set the orientation to be row. And we're just going to create a variable called the apply button, which we'll put in group 2 as a button, and we'll just say apply. Now let's go ahead and center our main window as well as show it and take a look. So because I haven't saved this, I'm getting an error for the JSON. So I'm just going to save this where my JSON is. And now if we run it, and now it's looking pretty good here. We have our edit text box with our selected file location, our file button, which gives us a nice help tip, and our apply button. So now we need to go ahead and apply some functionality to our get file button. To do this, we're going to grab our get file button itself, and we'll say on click, what function do we want to do? And likewise, we're going to want to add one for the apply button here. So I'll grab my apply button, and on click, we're going to do this function. So inside of our get file button, the first thing we're going to do is open a file dialog so that the user can select one of their files. So to do this, we're just going to grab our file global variable up here, and we're going to set that equal to itself, and we're going to open a dialog. You can see it gives us an option here to select that. What we're going to do is pass two arguments through. The first one is going to be a string, and this is going to contain the text that it shows the user. So we're just going to say open a file please. And the second string is going to contain the file types that we wish the user to select from. So we're just going to say something like acceptable files, since we have more than one file type to select from. And then anything we put after this colon here is going to be the file types. To basically give it a file type to select from, we're going to put a star or an asterisk, and then the file extension, so .txt. And if I was to go ahead and run this right now, click on file, you can see it tells us open a file please, and these are the current only acceptable files. So how do we add JSON and XML to this? Well, we're just going to put a comma after the text, and then we'll add another asterisk, add another file type, and we can just keep adding as many file types as we'd like. So now we've added our text, JSON, and XML. If we click on it now, you can see we have those to choose from. Alright, and once the user has selected a file, what we want to do is change our text inside of that edit text box that's reserved for our file location. So I'm going to grab our file location box and the text. We're going to set that equal to our file, which the user just selected, and the fs name, which is going to give us the full folder path name for this file. Now you might be wondering, what if the user doesn't select a file on the open dialog? Well, it actually returns false if you were to do that, so it wouldn't even get to this line here that sets the edit text box to something new. And after we've changed the name of the text box here, that indicates that we've actually selected a file. So what we're going to do is set the check equal to 1, which we're just going to say if check is 1, then they have a file selected, and if check is 0, no file is selected. So that's actually it for the get file button. We can move on to the main meat here, or the apply button. The first thing we're going to do inside of here is check what our check is. If our check is equal to 0, which means no file is selected, we're going to tell the user to please select a file. And then we'll return false to leave this function and start over. And then we'll add an else statement after that, because if it is equal to 1, they have a file selected, we want to do something with that file. So we're going to set up two variables inside of here. One's going to be called the file extension, and the other is going to be called the file data. Now we're not going to get the file data right now, but we are going to set up the file extension. So to do this, it might seem a little bit tricky. We have two file extensions with 3 characters in them, XML and text, and one with 4. So how are we going to get just the last 3 or last 4 characters of this? Well, to start, I'm going to set our file extension equal to our file location box.text, which is going to contain our whole file string, and that way we can parse that string and get the extension from it. So now we need to do some checks to check what extension the user has selected. So underneath our file data, I'm going to set up an if statement, and this is going to be checking if it's a JSON file. So we're going to grab our file extension, which again is the full path of where this file they selected is, and we're going to take the substring of it. Now the substring method takes two arguments, the first of which is the first index we want to start from cutting, and the second one is where we want to end. So because all files end with an extension, we're going to want to grab the last 3 or last 4 characters in our string. So to do this, I'm going to grab the substring of our file extension, and the first point we're going to cut is going to be our file extension.length -4, and we're going to go all the way to file extension.length. So the way this is going to work is if we have our file extension and our JSON here, we're going to go to the length of the extension, which ends after this n, and we're going to subtract 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and that will leave us with just JSON. So we're going to check if our substring here is equal to the string JSON. And if it is, we're going to set our file data variable equal to a function we're going to create called read.json. And now under this, we're basically going to have an else statement for the other two possible cases, a text file or an XML, which both have only 3 characters in the extension. So if it's not a JSON, it has to be one of those. So we're going to create a switch statement to just check which one it is. And the reason we need to check which one it is and not just apply the same function to text and XML is our text file is formatted a lot differently than our XML. Our XML, we can actually reference tag names to get the values, but with our text file, we're getting them line by line. So what we're going to check in our switch statement is going to be very similar to what we had up here. So I'm just going to copy and paste our substring method here, paste it in here, and instead of subtracting 4, because that's what JSON is, it's 4 long, we're going to grab 3. So instead of length -4, we're going to say length -3. And then we can set up our cases here. The first case is going to be txt for a text file, add a break, and the second case is going to be XML for an XML file. If it is a text file, we'll set our file data to read text, a function we're going to set up. And if it's an XML, we'll set the file data equal to read XML. So basically what all this is going to do is it's going to check what format the file is, and then it's going to set a file data variable equal to the same type of data, and we're going to go into each one of these functions here later, and we're going to program in the functionality and return an object where we can easily get the 3 values of comp name, background color, and lens flare. Now outside of our else statement as well as our switch here, we're going to call a function called changeComp, and through this we're going to pass our file data, and this is going to be the function that actually changes the comp name, adds the background color, and adds a lens flare if it says yes. We'll get to that in a minute, but first we need to set up our read.json, read.text, and read.xml functions. So we'll just say function read.json, function read.text, and function read.xml. And while we're down here, let's go ahead and set up our changeComp function. And since we're passing file data through here, we'll just call it data in here. And also, before I forget, I'm going to add an alert just saying done so we know that it actually made it through all the way. So let's start off with our read.json function. What we're going to do is set up a variable called the current line, and we're also going to create an array called JSON stuff, and we'll set that equal to an empty array. Now what we're going to do, since we have our file as a global variable, we can access it in here. We're going to grab our file and open it, and we're opening it to read it, so we'll put R as our argument. Then we're going to run a while loop, and we're going to say while it's not the file and the end of file. So while it's not the end of the file, we're going to grab our current line and set that equal to our file, and we're going to read the current line. Then we'll grab our JSON stuff array, and we're just going to push the current line in. So what this is going to do is, if we have our JSON file here, it's going to run through line by line. So the first time through, current line is going to equal the comp name and template 2, and the second time through it's going to be the background color, and it's just going to be pushing all of that into this array here. Then once we're done going through our file, we'll go ahead and close it up so we don't have any issues. And we're going to set JSON stuff equal to itself. So JSON stuff equals JSON stuff. And we're actually going to join it based on this empty string here. And what that's going to do is join it together into a format where we can use JSON. So we're going to create one more variable called Parse JSON. We're going to set this equal to JSON in caps, and we're going to parse something. We're going to parse JSON stuff. And then finally, because we're setting file data equal to this read JSON, we need to return this data. So we're just going to return our parsed JSON. And just to check that this is working, I'm going to alert our parsed JSON and grab one of these values here like background color. And let's see if this alerts properly. So I'm going to switch the file type to JSON, and I'll select my tutorial.json file, click on apply, and as you can see, it's giving us the background color just fine. Alright, next up, let's go ahead and read our text file. Just like our read JSON, we're going to set up a few initial variables to store all of the information. Again, we're going to use one called current line just because it's simple and easy to use. We're also going to set one called text array, and this is basically the same thing as our JSON stuff up here. And the way we're going to read this text file is basically the same as our JSON. However, we're going to do some stuff afterwards to get our object set up. So, like before, we're going to open up our file and read it. And also like before, while we're not at the end of our file, we're going to do something. And that something is our current line is going to equal our file.readLine. And then we're going to grab our text array and push in our current line. And we'll make sure we close up that file here. And now we need to basically parse our text data into an object so we can return that and call, say, file data.backgroundColor or file data.lensFlare and get the proper values. So in our text file, we have template3, our background color, and our lens flare bool. So basically what we want to do is set up an object that simulates the same thing. Since we're going line by line here, we know which array contains what information in our text array. Index 0 is going to have our comp name, index 1 is going to have our background color, and index 2 is going to have whether or not we want a lens flare. So after we close our file, we're going to set up a new variable called a text object. And this is going to be an object rather than an array. So I'm going to set up the brackets there and close it with a semicolon. And now we can simply set up our properties here, which we only have 3, one called comp name, and we'll put a colon after that, one called background color, and one called lens flare. For our comp name, like I said, we already know where all these are located in the array, so we're just going to grab our text array and index 0, which is going to be equal to, in this case, template 3. And to close a line in our object here, we're just going to put a comma. Then for our background color, text array index 1, and for our lens flare, text array index 2, and we don't need to end it with a comment because it's the final property. And then finally, we're going to return our text object. And just like before, I want to double check that this is working properly. So I'm going to grab our text object, and let's grab the comp name. So if we run it here, we've got text file selected. Select my text file and apply. And as you can see, we're getting our comp name accurate. Alright, now for the final read function. For this, the XML is a little bit different, but luckily it's actually less code than you'd think. What we're going to do is start off by opening our file to read. Then we're going to set up a variable called our XML string, and this is going to be equal to our file.read. And this is actually going to read the entire file at once. So rather than going line by line through this XML, it's going to get all of this data at once. Then after that, we're going to set one more variable up called myXML, and we'll set this equal to a new XML, and the stuff that we want to turn into an XML is our XML string because that's what we got from our file here. So basically when we read our file, we're just getting text, but when we set it up through a new XML, we're actually converting that text into an XML. Then we're simply going to grab our file and close it, and we'll return myXML. And one last time, let's go ahead and alert myXML, and let's grab the lens flare property. So I'll switch the file type to XML and select my tutorial XML file, click on apply, And yes, we do indeed want a lens flare. Alright guys, that's it. Just kidding. We've now finished our implementation of reading these file types. Now we need to grab all the data that we've parsed and use it to change our composition or any layers. So now we can go into our change comp function. And if you remember, this is just after we read the file data. So no matter what kind of file they choose, our file data is all going to be structured the same. It's going to have a composition name, a background color, and a lens flare. So inside of our change comp function, we're going to set a variable for our current active composition. And this is just going to be app.project.activeItem. And then the first thing we're going to want to do, because it's really simple, is change the name of our composition to be our comp name. So to do this, we'll just grab our comp.name and set this equal to data.compName. Super simple, but it's about to get a little bit more complex. After we've changed our comp name, the next thing we need to change is our background color. I should note that I purposely made this into an After Effects friendly format. You might get an XML file with a hexadecimal value or using 255 values rather than just one. But since this is already ready to read for After Effects, we can go ahead and grab it. So we're going to call a function called change background color. And we're going to pass two arguments through this, the first of which is our composition, and then we're going to grab our data and the background color, and then we're going to convert that to a string. The reason we're converting it to a string is sometimes when you import it, if it's say a JSON, it might interpret this as an array of ints, but the way we're going to be manipulating it using the substring method, we're going to need it to be a string. So we'll create a function called change background color. And our two arguments are going to be comp and color. And inside of here, we're going to set our color value, which is currently, if we selected this XML file, 111, including these brackets. We're going to set this equal to itself and the substring 1, and then it's going to end at its length -1. So what this is going to do is basically cut out the brackets. So it's going to start at 1, so it's going to start at the beginning here, go forward 1, and then it's going to go all the way to the length -1. So we're just going to get these values here. Then because this is still a string, we need to convert these string values into an array. So then we're going to say a variable called color array, and we'll set that equal to color, and we're going to split this based on a comma and a space, because every element in here is going to be separated by a comma and a space. If we run the split method using this, we're going to get an array of 3 values. And then finally, to change our actual background color, we'll just grab our composition and set the property background color, and we'll just say equals, and we need to pass in 3 values, RG and B, which is just going to be equal to our color array index 0, color array index 1, and our color array index 2. So just to make sure this is working, we're going to alert the color array here, and I'm also going to alert just a random index of it. So we'll say color 0. And at this point, we actually need to run this in After Effects because we're referencing things like the composition. So let's go ahead and run this in After Effects. Select a file, click on Apply. As you can see, we get our color values array here, as well as our first index. So it's perfectly readable, and if we actually check, the background color is the appropriate color. Alrighty, so there's one last thing we need to do, and that is add an epic lens flare if we need to. So after we change the background color, we're going to want to check if it's yes or no. If it's yes, we want to add the lens flare. If it's no, we need to do nothing. So we're going to check our data.lensFlare. We're going to say if it's equal to yes, then we're going to run a function called addLensFlare, and we're going to pass through our composition. We don't need to do anything if it says no, because if it says no, we don't need to do anything or add a lens flare. So we'll create our last function here, addLensFlare, bring in our composition, and inside of here, we're just going to add a few lines of code to create a solid, add optical flares, and basically set the render mode so we can see everything underneath it. So we'll start off by creating a variable called lensFlare, and we'll set this equal to our comp, the layers, and we want to add a solid. The first argument for a solid is a color. We're just going to set equal to black here. Second argument is a name. I like to use OF. Then we need the width, so I'll grab the comp.width. The height, so I'll grab the comp.height. The pixel aspect ratio, as well as the duration, so I'm going to grab the comp.duration. Then we're going to add a Video Copilot optical flares effect to it. To do this, we'll grab our lens flare layer here. We'll go into the effects, and we're going to add a property. Now, anytime you add a property to the effects, you need to put in the Adobe match name for it. You can't just put in optical flares. So the actual match name for optical flares is Video Copilot in all caps, and then a space, optical flares with no space. So let's go ahead and run this and see what other thing we need to do. I'm going to grab the XML file because it says yes to lens flares, and I'll click on apply. So we now have our optical flares, but we need to change the render mode so we can actually see below it. To do this, I'm going to create a variable called renderProp for render property, and this is going to be equal to our lens flare layer. We're going to go into the effects, the effect called optical flares, and the property called render mode. Then we're simply going to grab our render property and we'll set the value to something. Because it's a drop down, we're going to have to pick which index works best. So what we want to do is change this drop down, it looks like, to on transparent, which looks like the first value here. Because remember, the 0th value is the first, really. So let's try set value to 1, and let's run this. I'll delete my optical flares here, and we'll select a file. In this case, I'll just do the text file, and I'll click on apply. And it already tells us it's done here. You can see it actually didn't change it, so let's change the value to 2 and run it one more time here. And now it says done, and it's changed it to on transparent so we can see it on top of our footage. Alright guys, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. This video was a lot of fun to make because I got to experiment a bit in adjusting compositions and such. Be sure to smash the like button if you enjoyed this video, and also be sure to hit the subscribe button and that bell button next to it to be notified for new uploads. As always, if you have any questions or comments, leave them down below, as well as suggestions for future videos. That's going to do it for today's video, and we'll see you guys next time.